Welcome
Okay.
everybody to the 2020 Uplift Digital Convergence. My name is Mariela and I am one of Uplift's co-directors, and I am joined here by Tyler, who I will let them introduce themselves. Thank you for coming over and joining our session.
Cool. Great. Thank you very much. Good morning, friends. I'm glad to be here with you. My name is Tyler. I use he pronouns. For the next 2 hours, I'll be facilitating a workshop about mutual aid disaster relief. This is my third time presenting at Uplift. I'm very grateful to be here with all of you. I think that this community is really inspiring and rad. We were just chatting about that as you all were coming in. I want to especially say thanks to Lyrica for the invitation, and so much gratitude to all the organizers who work hard to make this special event possible for all of us. I'm getting started right away, even though I know folks will trickle in over time because I've got a lot to say. And this workshop in this format, it's not quite the same when I can't see all of your beautiful faces. And honestly, I'm a little worried that it won't be quite up to my normal sort of educational standards in this format. I mean, I didn't even shave. I'm not wearing shoes. I am wearing pants, don't worry. But just now this weekend, I'm blessed to be in a beautiful, abundant location, a little cottage near my home place in the Driftless region in western Wisconsin, surrounded by cold springs full of watercress going into trout streams and densely forested hills. It's only a few miles from the beautiful upper Mississippi River. I wish you all could see it here. It's so stunningly green here. Unfortunately, I'm stuck inside at the moment because it's too sunny to see my computer screen. And in the shade, it's full of mosquitoes. But I'm having a nice weekend. I grew up on these lands. I took these ecosystems as my elders, and I learned a lot from them. As for traditional territories, this geologically unique area was a special place for several peoples, including Ojibwe, Dakota, Ho-Chunk, and later Sauk peoples, who all hunted and harvested different things in different seasons. I mostly have lived in other places, but recently I returned to this region after my tiny hometown got a catastrophic flood in 2018. That's not my only relationship to the practice of mutual aid disaster relief, though. I spent more than a year in New Orleans after it was devastated by Hurricane Katrina in 2005 and 2006. I also helped out in 2017 in Morelos after a series of big earthquakes hit southern Mexico, where I just happened to be visiting a friend and getting some herbal medicine. Actually, when I think about it, I've got loads of experience with all sorts of smaller disasters like tornadoes or a lightning strike wildfire at a neighbor's house. For rural people, for poor and working class people, mutual aid is an ordinary activity. And because that's such a crucial point, we're going to start by making sure that everyone knows exactly what we mean when we use terms like mutual aid and, I'm sorry everyone, I just have my notes here. I'm having a little technical glitch. We'll define our terms, and then I'll tell a few stories giving examples of mutual aid projects created by regular folks just like all of us, as well as principles. I'll share some basic principles and techniques to get you started on the work of community disaster preparedness in your home place. We'll reserve as much time as possible for a participatory small group activity, and then hopefully we'll have enough time for Q&A at the end. I'm assuming that at least a few of the folks here will be grateful for a 101 level session. If you're seeking next level knowledge, I'm sorry, but let's talk more later. I would love to continue this conversation and go with sort of deeper kind of stuff. So this Zoom format is less familiar to me. Normally, I like to do things in a popular education style. That means that we're all teachers and learners, and my job is more about facilitating, asking the right questions, not being the sole authority on the subject. However, I'm not too familiar with how Zoom works, and so that's challenging for me at this moment. The best I can do is to give a series of short talks. They'll be broken up by one personal reflection activity, then a small group discussions near the end. Basically, I'm remixing a 1.5 day participatory program into a 2-hour webinar. So I've had to really rethink this format. Please forgive me if it's imperfect. And you can find a PDF version of a facilitator's guide to the full workshop on this page of our website. I'm going to share my screen now. Oh, how do I do that? There it is. Sorry for the delay. That's not what I want. That's the one I want. Yeah. Sorry, everyone, for just one little mistake I just made. Hold on a second. That's what I want. So if you go to the Mutual Aid Disaster Relief Resources page, I just checked it this morning. This is actually, I've got the correct address on a different slide. So we're going to come back to this. Sorry for my little bit of technical difficulty here. I trust you all can see this screen. In general, I always have too much that I want to say, but only very limited time. So many things can only be mentioned in passing, but please hit me up later if you want to know more. This is my email address right here. And just for fun, for about 20 minutes, I have this slideshow using illustrations from my educational activism group called Beehive Collective. I really do see myself as a cross-pollinator of ideas and movements, and that's what this webinar is all about too. So let's get started. All right. On all of these slides, I've got reference points for you all to do further research. These are on the slides for the benefit of people who are watching the video in the future. For all of you who are watching it live right now, I'm going to put all of these links in the chat near the end so that it'll be real easy for you to copy them. So around 2015, I was invited by friends to join the initial visioning team for a project that we eventually decided to call Mutual Aid Disaster Relief. I like to call it MAD Relief for short. This simple and very literal name was intended to highlight the actions that anyone can do. Spelled in lowercase letters, Mutual Aid Disaster Relief is an activity that people do every day around the world, helping neighbors who are having a hard time and especially working collectively to raise up the entire community. This is normal human behavior. And our crews are just a few among hundreds of diverse groups working to encourage this really productive relationship building and community growing approach to make it more integral to everyone's daily lives. I'm interested in defining the term mutual aid because it's currently very fashionable to use it for every activity that seeks to help people in the pandemic time. If anybody listens to anything that AOC says, she's talking about mutual aid all the time nowadays. But mutual aid is a term with a specific history. It was originally used by a Russian zoologist who also happened to be an anarchist. Peter Kropotkin improved and expanded Darwin's theory of evolution by pointing out that it wasn't always about competition. In fact, most of the time, relationships between species are mutually beneficial. They proliferate and diversify together as a community, an ecosystem of support networks, a perfect example being fungal mycelia, connecting all the trees so that they can share resources and be more effective homes to diverse animals who in turn will fertilize and also organize the forest. In our lives, mutual aid takes many forms, sometimes as simple as asking for a couple eggs from your neighbor, then offering to feed their cat when they're out of town. Perhaps one of the most robust examples is the practice of social aid and pleasure clubs of Black New Orleans. These were neighborhood resource pools and insurance safety nets for working class people who all contributed a little money and knew that they could avail the diverse community benefits when life took a hard turn. Excess funds were regularly redistributed through huge community meals and Mardi Gras celebrations. Many of these organizations still exist after over 100 years. They are a major part of the fabric of New Orleans, and many have been instrumental in recovery efforts from hurricanes and floods. So, in mutual aid disaster relief, our mission is grassroots, do-it-yourself humanitarian aid, as well as building community power through disaster preparedness, collaborative recovery, and reimagining more sustainable futures grown out of collective generosity and trust. Essentially, we are supporting neighbors helping neighbors in times of crisis. We adapt our tactics to meet unique needs of different communities experiencing different problems. Most of our organizers and volunteers are coming from poor and working class communities, and they are serving those same communities. We have a slogan that says solidarity, not charity, because our work is all about connecting with others to see that our struggles and problems are interlinked. That's the slide I meant to show you. Sorry. That we all need a helping hand sometimes, and that we all have something valuable to offer. We strive to use whatever privileges each of us may have to become active accomplices, to procure resources and pass them along to those who can't easily access them on their own, to take strategic risks that open doors toward disaster survivors' self-empowerment. We recognize that so-called natural disasters are different in degree, but not in kind, from ongoing crises that impoverished and marginalized peoples experience every day. Therefore, we see DIY disaster response as a revolutionary act, confronting and potentially dismantling systems of oppression, creating new worlds in gaps left when existing structures crumble. I have zillions of stories about how this has played out in past hurricanes, floods, and fires. But in this brief time, we're going to focus on key concepts and then share just a few stories. Our website and Facebook page are chock full of great examples, so check those out. All right, had my slides in slightly the wrong order, but this is the next one. This other article listed here includes a lot about the history of mutual aid. It's a really excellent article. Check that out if you still feel unclear about the meaning and the implications of this foundational concept. The second link has many more resources as well as a cute animated video. In Mad Relief, we operate on a shoestring budget. That may be changing because we're getting a lot of positive attention in the last 2 years, but for now, we're all volunteers. All donations that we receive in the central organization are pretty much immediately redistributed to local groups in frontline communities. And we operate more in the spirit of, you can do this too, rather than we're here to save the day. We don't have dues-paying members or local chapters. Instead, our approach over the last few years has been to build a network, mostly just connecting with already existing groups that are doing good work in their communities, like free food or free clinics or childcare cooperatives or community gardens or ecosystem restoration or whatever. The network organizing model grows an organically interconnected population of change makers who are permanent but decentralized. A sort of decentralized body of change makers continuously building skills and community power by using disaster preparedness as opportunity for organizing, removing barriers, and building bridges. Next, please. There we go. Our website consists mostly of lots of resources that local groups can utilize to empower themselves and their communities. I encourage all of you to check it out since I won't be able to cover everything today. On this slide, you can see some of our values, sort of official list of values, and links to more info on the website. We prioritize directing materials and volunteers toward people of color and other marginalized communities because they're so often ignored by the big nonprofits. I've seen this really clearly in many situations. Those who have accumulated wealth find it much easier to get help from insurance companies and relief programs, while those who are already struggling are considered unworthy of aid. Like, for example, people who were homeless before the hurricane go to an emergency shelter and they're required to wear a special bracelet that basically identifies them as being less valuable and less deserving of help, and they feel disrespected and uncomfortable, and often they just leave and risk it on the streets. We try to do the opposite, encouraging folks to take what they need without asking lots of invasive questions, inviting survivors to transcend their victimized state by volunteering to help others. asking folks what they need most, even if it was something they needed before the disaster, and then reaching out to our networks to meet those critical needs. That is what solidarity, not charity, looks like in practice. Why do we do it this way? Well, in part, it's because it just works better. So do you all remember Occupy Wall Street? It was not exactly effective at building a lasting movement with clear demands, but then the demands of the moment clarified themselves when in late 2012, Hurricane Sandy devastated New York City. And Occupy Wall Street changed their name to Occupy Sandy. And over 7,000 volunteers worked together to creatively and collaboratively support many, many thousands of the poorest and most marginalized survivors of the storm. The US Department of Homeland Security actually released a report that said that decentralized grassroots aid programs outperformed top-down government and NGO programs in every way, every time. We've actually posted that study on our website. You can find it at the bottom link if you like to read big technical stuff. It's a pretty good read. And in part, we do it this way because it's an ideological choice. Our membership is diverse, but tends to appeal to those who have anti-authoritarian beliefs, or in other words, a general distrust and opposition to nation states and corporations. Many of us are anarchists. Surely you all have heard that word before, but because I don't know who I'm talking to, I don't know what kind of connotation you have with it. I want to be absolutely clear by clarifying the meaning of the word. It's related to monarchy, which means one ruler. Mono equals one, arch or archy equals ruler. So anarchy simply means no ruler. There are many, many different perspectives within this milieu, but the way I see it, the desire for anarchism is just the most idealistic, hopeful utopian version of the pursuit of democracy. There's a central belief that we all have the ability to live dignified and joyous, and we just need to communicate with one another to establish reasonable boundaries and norms, etc. And we also need to collectively defend the most vulnerable from oppressive and dehumanizing violence, or even better, assist them in ways that empower them to defend themselves. People who hold anarchist beliefs are generally opposed to capitalism and colonization, which we see as nearly the exact same thing. The phrase private property is theft is a typical anarchist axiom. And we're also opposed to prisons, police, and any type of classism or casteism, plus a general distaste for alienated, mindless consumerism. We want to build more community power from below, grow connections and relations to enrich our deeply meaningful lives, and we generally care about the earth and ecosystems as well as traditional people who are protecting their lands and waters. Anarchist people of color have been a big part of the recent uprisings, and some of the articles linked on this slide have lots of good information about that, with lots more links out to many other very good resources. I encourage you to check out these two articles in particular if you're interested in learning about that. I think that it's just fascinating that anarchist ideas are becoming really hip right now. They even publish articles about it in fashion magazines like Teen Vogue, right? The reason is clear, because we are once again in a world dominated by corporate colonization. This neoliberal era very closely resembles the first half of the 20th century, which was the time of robber barons and totalitarians, interlocking and expanding crises caused by imperialism and war and pandemic, which was also the heyday of the original anarchists, who were the fuel, they fueled the fire that brought the rise of the unions, the anti-war and anti-fascist movements, feminism and sexual liberation, and etc. So recently I've been reading a biography of Buenaventura Durruti, one of the most famous of the Spanish anarchists, who very nearly took over the whole country in the dangerous years of the 1930s, when many peasants and workers were starving and the monarchy was crumbling from internal corruption. We put a quote from Durruti on the back of our t-shirt. Let me see if I have it here. I almost forgot it, but I might have it here. I don't have it. Sorry, folks. The quote says, We are not afraid of ruins. We carry a new world here in our hearts. That world is growing in this very moment. Durruti's New World, which is still so needed today, is all about solidarity, responsibility, dignity, camaraderie, courage, and compassion and action. This idea was not merely revolutionary in the traditional sense, but transformative in radically loving ways, striving for a bottom-up workers' utopia that emphasized freedom, care, collaboration, and camaraderie. I can't succinctly describe every aspect of the anarchist perspective, but I can say this. When systems break down, when survival is in danger, reach out to the anarchists because we know how to build stuff. We know how to envision a collective future together, how to stand up for each other, even through decades of violent repression. It's a politics of praxis with a focus on action. Today's world is one that compels us to act. For those who'd like to study more, I'll mention another famous anarchist thinker from that same era, because I believe that we still have much to learn from an older and tougher generation. My favorite anarchist thinker was Emma Goldman, a Jewish immigrant midwife who founded a magazine called Mother Earth News in 1906. Her working class perspective is humble in a way that's very accessible and radical in a way that's very empowering and encouraging. Back in those days, radical change makers like Emma used the terms anarchist and communist and libertarian interchangeably. They all meant the same thing when people first started using them. It was all about working class solidarity across boundaries of nations, across borders, races, genders, and their goal was to create an entirely new world, an entirely different society. Now, today, faced with the demands of climate change, we must have the same ambitions. So these ideas are returning, and younger generations are grappling with the fertile tensions between autonomy and community, accountability and liberty, and I see some hope there. Okay, that's enough of that. Let's get back to Mad Relief. Since Hurricane Katrina in 2005, we have consistently seen appalling government neglect and rapacious opportunism in the wake of climate disasters. It's called disaster capitalism, when corporations take advantage of catastrophes to buy up large swaths of land, force tax cuts and policy changes in their favor, and pursue monopolies squeezing out local businesses, all while the survivors are reeling, just trying to get their lives back in order. There's an excellent book about this called The Shock Doctrine, and the author Naomi Klein has recently been publishing a lot of stuff about coronavirus capitalism. If you don't want to read the book, that video linked at the bottom is a good 8-minute summary. And yet, communities do recover together. The incredible positive results that we've seen in the aftermath of recent hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, and fires are really a testament to the power of the people. There's this enormous potential that can be released. In our normal daily lives, we're so atomized and separated from our true selves as well as our communities. And it's so painful because that's not the way humans are meant to be. You know, here in the United States, even in the best of times, there's a dangerous and widespread mental health crisis caused by a society that's become profoundly antisocial. During disasters, people who were barely surviving before are pushed to their breaking point. However, crises have a way of opening people up so that they're more willing to try new ways of being. And new ideas and ways of relating bring new possibilities, becoming catalysts that birth new worlds. There's an excellent book about this called A Paradise Built in Hell. All these examples of utopias growing in the wreckage left behind. Both of these books reference the battle over the soul of post-Katrina New Orleans, as grassroots groups hustled to protect their neighborhoods and profiteers attempted to steal them and turn them into resorts and playgrounds for wealthy tourists. You can get free digital copies of these books at these links. They're both really excellent. I highly recommend them. I want to talk a little bit more about the phrase, the power of the people. The Black Panther Party had a slogan, all power to the people. Black Panther ideas were very important to the foundation of the Mad Relief predecessor called Common Ground in post-Katrina New Orleans, especially the concept of survival programs. In the struggling 70s, Black Panther survival programs sought to raise consciousness in African Americans and to organize their communities to improve living conditions and to stand up to racist police and city planners. But first, they took care of immediate basic needs to empower folks to take the next steps. The most popular survival programs included free breakfast for children, free taxis for elders, free clinics. They even turned an abandoned hospital in New York into a free drug rehabilitation and free STD testing center. Hepatitis, all sorts of other stuff. It was great. All of these were done with grassroots funding and volunteer labor, and these are only just a handful of examples. In just a few short years, the Panthers dramatically transformed the lives of many of the poorest peoples of Oakland, Chicago, New York City, and all around the country. Tragically, this nationwide Black Power organization was very violently crushed by the FBI, whose director was notoriously racist and could not tolerate people of color standing up for themselves and demanding full human rights. By the way, that's also what happened to other Black and brown power groups in the 70s, as well as most of the original anarchists too. But remembering these legacies helps us to continue their work in our generation. Like when Common Ground used hundreds of volunteers in a long-term civil disobedience direct action, cleaning the condemned Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School, which energized a local movement to save the lower Ninth Ward from being completely bulldozed. That's what the city planners wanted to do. That school is now a vital community center that hosts many uplifting projects and events. And Common Ground, even though when it was big for only a year, but what's left over from it has continued on now for, gosh, it's 15 years now. And they have been, for 15 years, they've been doing wetland remediation to protect the city from future storms. So, even though 50 years ago the world was very different, the stories of the Black Panthers are still inspiring today. There was also a sister group called the American Indian Movement, and their struggle placed some of the groundwork necessary for a recent resurgence of Native power movements which exploded in the famous Standing Rock pipeline blockade. Many of our Mad Relief people went to help in North Dakota, knowing how to build field kitchens that feed thousands of people, or practice medicine in a field, or train young volunteers in nonviolent defensive tactics. These are all very useful skills, not only in the context of disaster recovery, but also in the context of disaster prevention, like stopping a groundwater destroying oil pipeline. Respirators left over from mold cleanup were sent to Standing Rock to protect people from tear gas. And truckloads of supplies donations left over from Standing Rock went to many different frontline land defense and humanitarian groups. That's solidarity. So I've been trying to paint this picture of decentralized direct action empowerment of the anarchists, pragmatic survival programs of the Black Panthers, and the dignified ecosystem defense of the Standing Rock water protectors. Mad Relief has learned from all of them to create strategies deeply grounded in listening and honoring local cultures and histories, and in prioritizing inclusion and empowerment by affirming individuals' different needs and abilities, while also recognizing that we're all connected in a greater ecosystem, and that simple mutual aid work can be a humble first step on a path toward a better world together. I'm sorry I don't have any website link on this page. I just didn't know what was the best website to go to for Standing Rock stuff. You'll have to do that research on your own, sorry. Okay, so I'm definitely going to skip a lot of good stories, but I encourage you to read more on the Mad Relief website or check out these excellent podcasts. Those are two of my favorite articles. Those podcasts are both fantastic, really great thing to listen to while you're locked in or whatever. So that brings me around to talking about the pandemic. In so many ways, this situation is the opposite of a typical disaster scenario. In the wake of a flood or fire, everyone comes together and helps each other out, finding camaraderie and meaning in shared hardship and cooperative work. But now we're told that we can't get together. This is like fundamentally anti-human, right? The mental health toll of this pandemic can't be understated. So the MAD Relief Network has been convening weekly conference calls as a way of staying connected and sharing information. Many diverse folks have been attending these calls, and I've heard many expressions of gratitude that just holding this space to share good ideas, successes, and failures, it's really been uplifting for folks. If you want to join these calls, please contact me and I'll happily connect you. I'm not going to put the info on this recording, but you can ask me. I'd be happy to invite you in. Let's see here. I've also, this slide was the one that I added last minute. This is just a few more articles, and the one on the bottom is a zine. They're just recently, these were just recently published, and they're both really, really excellent. Check them out if you want to learn more about what we've been up to, what we've been learning, and what we've been inspired by, what other folks are doing. Okay, so one of the most inspiring projects of all is actually coming out of the indigenous lands of the Colorado Plateau. The Dene people have a reservation that spans an enormous area in the Four Corners region. You know, it's a pretty dry, high desert, and poverty is endemic, but there's also a persistent traditional culture and very tight family and community relationships keep people going. Many elders have been resisting a huge coal mine for decades. So, you know, these are people who know all about mutual aid. They have a very high rate of COVID. I don't know what it is statistically at the moment, but several weeks ago, you know, it was like, you know, sky high sort of caseload. Their situation is particularly difficult because of the lack of running water. But lots of young people have been traveling all over the vast reservation lands, setting up portable hand washing stations and distributing supplies. This beautiful website has lots of resources for indigenous mutual aid in the pandemic, not only in the Four Corners region, but all over Turtle Island. Right, so on the Mad Relief website, you can find a list with tons of examples of other local mutual aid groups. This list is growing daily, and it includes not only pandemic response groups, but also zines and other documents, and lots of widely varied resources. It might be a little overwhelming at first because there's so much in there, but also very inspiring to see how this movement is growing exponentially in a time when it's so needed. Folks are doing everything from childcare and educational tutoring, elder care, housing and tenants' rights, including groups advocating for rent strikes, PPE distribution, herbal and allopathic medicine, even direct cash grants to folks who lost work and income. There are hundreds of groups working together, meeting needs as much as they can. It's powerful to take a look at this list. Okay. So that's our intro. Before we move into the next section, I want to do a quick activity to loosen up after such a massive info cram. I'm sorry for the length of that, but I just want to be absolutely clear about what we mean by mutual aid disaster relief and why we do things this way. So this brief activity will be a personal reflection activity. I recommend a pen and paper if you have that handy. In 4 minutes, write down examples of mutual aid in your communities. What problems have you solved for others? What problems have others solved for you? What crises, big or small, have you overcome together? In what ways do you work or live collaboratively? And if you're zooming through all of these bonus questions, if you feel like it, you could answer, in what ways could you work collaboratively in the future? What is needed? What may be offered? So I'm going to play a song that's exactly 4 minutes long after this activity. We'll look at some basic principles for responding and taking care of each other, and then we'll finish this session. The bulk of the session will be a small group breakout discussions. So enjoy this activity. I'll be back with you in 4 minutes. Don't look ahead, there's stormy weather. Another roadblock in our way. All in the time here we stay. Always set up to carry on. They don't fly, we will run. Now we push right past to find out. Oh, I don't know what they are on. So let them say we can do better. They got the rules that we can't break. They wanna sit and watch you wither. The legacy's too hard to take. Always set up to carry on. They come from we will run. Now we push right past to find out. No matter where what they are on. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm sorry for all the disruptions that just happened. My phone battery is about to die. I have my notes on it. I'm just having a very minor technical issues. But for the sake of reserving enough time for for our small group activity. I'm just going to kind of move on to the next thing. However, if you all want to put some reflections, if you had some reflections that really, struck you in your heart as being important, and you want to put those in the chat, please do. I'm going to continue kind of like doing my spiel, and then I'm going to read everything you put into the chat. I'm really excited to answer questions and all that sort of stuff. But I'm just going to kind of get through the stuff that I want to make absolutely sure that we cover, and then we'll come back to that. So the next 3 slides are from the workshop facilitation guide that I mentioned earlier. That address that's at the bottom of this page is the correct place to find the PDF version of this guide. And I'm sorry that I had the wrong thing on the previous slide. The website just got upgraded recently, and I hadn't noticed. Sorry. I noticed this morning. So check out that facilitation guide. It's really cool. It's a rough draft, and I mean, it's rough, but this was a really great workshop that was really working for people. So before getting into the content of this diagram, this list, I'd like to make a point first that all these suggestions and principles are also relevant to community organizing and all of the aspects of this current uprising. I'm not saying that protests and riots are disasters, but what I'm saying is that the mutual aid approach is equally applicable to many diverse aspects of our complex co-creation of the world. I won't have time to talk specifically about how these principles for responding apply also to this political moment, but I encourage all of you to think about it, considering the benefits of things like street medics and radical legal collectives and free food and urban farming and canvassing neighborhoods and affinity groups, if you're familiar with that term, and all kinds of other things that apply to both situations. Okay, so here we're going to talk about a simple protocol for responding. Remember, in a major disaster, the real first responders are always the neighbors. I want you all to close your eyes and imagine a scenario, just for a minute. Imagine that you have responded to a call for support after a major disaster. You knock on a door in the affected community. Somebody opens the door and says, "Thank God, you're the first help we've seen in days." What do you do in that moment? And what do you wish you would have done leading up to it? What things do you wish you had with you? Open your eyes, think about it for a couple minutes. You can write some of these things into the chat if you like. I'm just trying to find how I access the chat so I can finally see what y'all have to say. There we go. Anyone have any thoughts of things they wish they had brought with them when they meet that person who needs help? There's an interesting comment from Gayatri. Let's come back to that. And I'm not going to put a lot of pressure on you all to say any specific thing, but it's some of the stuff you see in this little image here, right? People are bringing notebooks to take notes. They're bringing walkie-talkies to stay in communication with each other. They're bringing food and water and medicine, things that can comfort folks, when they need it most. So this easy protocol is a simple how-to for engaging in grassroots disaster response effectively. We're just going to go through the list. First is be prepared. Get training, practice needed skills. Share what you know or reach out to us at Mad Relief and we can try to help you find an appropriate trainer. Assess capacity and limitations continually. It's so important to understand what situations you are not prepared to handle and to make wise decisions. Form an affinity group, a small, tight-knit crew that trusts and works well together, and grow your team's skills strategically and proactively. Make a plan. Obviously, the first step to any successful endeavor. But we must also remember that when systems break down, situations can shift quickly and unexpectedly. So plans must be flexible. A contingency plan can be literally a lifesaver. Adaptation requires a solid communication plan. Schedule buddy check-ins or meet up at the end of every day to reassess plans collaboratively. Unilateral decisions in high-stress moments can be dangerous or disruptive, especially when related to volunteer management, transportation, or meetings or supplies, drop-off and pickup. Also, if possible, it's wise for one person in your crew to stay back but in constant contact, ready to respond to the needs of the team in the field. All right, the third category in the before you go section is to scout. When a disaster hits, local organizers rooted in that community will be out responding immediately. Usually the first step when we hear about a hurricane or other disaster is to reach out via email, phone, Facebook, any way we can to groups like Food Not Bombs local chapters, Earth First or Rising Tide chapters, Black Lives Matter chapters, Democratic Socialists of America chapters, Anarchist Black Cross chapters, Industrial Workers of the World local unions, etc. These are like our top go-tos. Because we already have friends in some of those places, and you know, even if we don't, we've had really good experiences with groups like this before. Ask what the situation is for them and how you can support. It's as simple as that. Sometimes it's just about amplifying their efforts already on the ground, or directing supplies and volunteers to these local community-rooted first responders. If you want to find more local responders, social media is often used to coordinate decentralized local relief efforts. Just search for groups or hashtags like hashtag Houston Strong or hashtag Chiapas NPA, Chiapas NPA. Listen is the first step when you're in the communities actually responding. This is the most important step. Common example, neighbors let us know that the person in the apartment next door is in a wheelchair that is motorized and he cannot charge it to leave his house. So we go check on him. In Puerto Rico after Maria, simply listening got us into the areas with the most need as soon as possible. It helped us know how to get to those areas by knowing which roads were still accessible. Comfort. Part of the listening process includes hearing and honoring the heavy pain and trauma that survivors are feeling, and psychological first aid can help to lift those off their shoulders. You don't need to know anything fancy, just active listening skills and empathy. Bringing water, food, medics, care packages can feel like an incredible uplifting blessing. And when distributed freely and lovingly, these little comforts strengthen survivors' resolve to persevere. During distribution efforts in Puerto Rico, Mad Relief volunteers heard neighbors request a pop-up clinic and then coordinated transport to bring more friends in need of access to medical care. Even just basic care was very enlivening and encouraging. Organize. Survivors know what they need to thrive, but they may need your help to get it. Make a plan with each person you talk to. Start small with your projects. You don't need to build a free clinic from the ground up. Instead, put together a small first aid station and then expand when you meet massage therapists and doulas and herbalists who want to help. And soon you'll have a bustling center of activity which will attract EMTs, nurses, and doctors, as well as all the supplies they may need. In the same spirit as starting small and collaboratively building opportunities for others to join, solidarity organizing is often focused on removing barriers, like when mutual aid disaster relief when we used mutual aid disaster relief badges and a great deal of persistence to gain access to overstocked but locked government supply warehouses in Puerto Rico. And then once the door was just cracked open a little, we uh, did the work of making more badges for local organizers, empowering them to get lots of aid out to marginalized communities. Return. We all have something to offer. This initial gift of basic medical care, food, water, flashlights, or internet can open possibilities for connection, dialogue, and many new relationships. These relationships are what will give us more strength and resilience next time. These relationships are the most valuable outcome, the inspiring fruit of cultivating empowerment and connection. So the three no's on the right side of your screen are important for avoiding common mistakes. The first one says no masters. The horizontal nature of our network is very important. Our heroes and elders are humans too, with their own inconsistencies, and just because someone started an organization or movement doesn't mean that they're certain to know what's needed in every specific situation. It doesn't actually do us any good to put people on pedestals. Better to work collaboratively across differences as equals rooted in our shared vision, creating authentic friendships as we struggle together. As the Zapatistas say, walking while asking questions. No flakes. When our hearts are overflowing with empathy, it's easy to slip in promises that we cannot keep. Imagine what it would feel like to lose everything, but then to your surprise, someone shows up and tells you they'll return with lots more help. Hey, yay, wow, that's amazing, right? But then you never see them again. It can be devastating, disempowering, depressing, and it damages the reputations of all of us doing grassroots humanitarian aid. Be very careful about this. Never, please, never, ever offer anything you cannot actually realize. Know your limits. Closely related. It's vital to know what you can and cannot actually do. Communicate your limitations frequently and ask for help when you need it. Consider your and others' mental health. Take breaks before you get burned out and ask for support within your crew or outside it. If you are present in the beginning stages of a new project, be especially conscious of limitations and think strategically about how they may be overcome. Think about critical infrastructure that you can tap into to build capacity. Is there a church that could act as housing for future volunteers? Is there a location to set up a first aid station that could potentially evolve into a wellness center or a clinic? What about a community center to distribute supplies? This next one, next slide. Please come next slide. What is happening? Aha, there it is. It's a photo because we reworked this one on our most recent workshop. So that also means I don't have a tight little script for it. I'm just going to keep this one short, just touch on some of these concepts. We really emphasize the importance of not only self-care. Self-care is good, but it's not enough. We also need to develop practices of community care. And this community care is absolutely essential part of doing grassroots humanitarian aid, because disaster zones are inherently unsafe. And that's just part of the nature. There is always going to be some amount of risk involved, both to our bodily health and also our mental health. And so we do our best to develop a culture of safety. We want inclusion and accessibility for everyone to be one of our highest priorities. So we want to make this work as safe as possible within reason. We like to talk about these three aspects to the culture of safety. They include awareness of your surroundings, connection to the other people around you, and balance. And I'm just going to quickly mention some of these detailed items that are on here. Self-care is the obvious place to start, right? You can't expect others to do it for you. Hydration is vital. Enough sleep is vital. Healthy food makes a huge difference in our energy and our mood. And actually eating together, especially big mass, uh, you know, big group meals are a really, really beautiful part of this experience and really necessary to maintain our feeling of being a cohesive team and just feeling uh, calm and supported. It's super important. Uh, if I had more time, I would talk at greater length about the Icarus project. You should look it up on your own. They're a really cool DIY mental health group that's been around for decades. They have a concept called MAD maps. There are these worksheets. You can download them from their website, and sort of before you go into an unstable and potentially dangerous place, it's a really good idea to chart out where you may have issues with you know, things that tend to produce fear and anxiety and triggering effects in you. You need to know these things before you go there, and that way you can effectively ask for help when you need it. Preventing mold-related injury is on here because it's one of the things that people often forget about. Mold can be very dangerous. I actually am suffering from some health problems that my acupuncturist says are in part because of a 15-year-old black mold infection that I got in New Orleans. You know, and it's sort of invisible. So we have lots of resources about mold safety on the resources section of our website. That's one of our big contributions. So you have no excuse to not be wearing a respirator and the suits and all this sort of stuff. Just ask us how to do it if it comes down to that. Risk aversion is on there because I already mentioned it. We want to create a culture of safety because we want this to be as accessible as possible. And so that's one of our priorities always, is to do things in a way that welcomes people in rather than scaring them away. There are times when we have to take risks, and we need to be brave and take those risks when those times come. But it's also really important to understand when it's appropriate and when it's not. In the second section, we talk about balancing work, rest, and play. That's fairly straightforward. Cultivating trustworthiness, a culture of trustworthiness, and an expectation that that's how everyone volunteering will behave will do wonders for your group cohesion and mental health. Inclusive structure, you know, the horizontality thing is really important. And the being welcome to all is really important because this is the only way that we'll really effectively be connecting with diverse peoples, is to include them in what we're doing, right? It's about solidarity, not about charity. So stay in touch, check in with your buddy all the time. And this concept of rings of support, it might be a little too small to read on your screen, but imagine that in the center ring are the people who are most affected by the issue, and the people who are least affected are on the outside of the ring. And each person has a buddy one buddy that they act as support for them because they're more affected by the situation. And they have another buddy who's a little bit further away and they can lean on, you know, they can get support, they can receive support as well. This rings of support method is really effective at distributing the trauma and anxiety that comes with these really stressful situations. So the phrase breakdown can lead to breakthrough is a common saying in the mental health community. It can also be true of systems and societies. Crisis is a time when difficult choices must be made, a time when important changes may finally come to fruition. Neoliberal capitalism and colonization is a daily disaster. The meaningless drudgery of work, the loss of authentic social relationships, the destruction of the water, air, and everything we need to survive. Even though a hurricane or a fire or a flood is immensely devastating, it also, in a sense, washes away the unmentionable daily disasters of capitalism. Without the degrading effects of constant coercion from above, most disaster survivors default back to meaningful relationships based on mutual aid. We want to stretch out these temporary autonomous zones where people are able to share goods and services with each other freely, where we reimagine new relationships and build something together. Think of all the things we rely on our opposition to do for us. Our food, water, energy, transportation, entertainment, communications, medical care, trash pickup, etc. If the political establishment takes care of people's survival needs, they maintain power. But due to capitalism eating up everything, including its own foundations, the political establishment seems increasingly disinterested and unable to meet those needs. If instead corporations or fascists meet people's needs, people will probably look to them for leadership. But if grassroots movements for collective liberation facilitate the people's ability to meet their own needs, the better world we dream of very well may become a reality. Disasters open cracks in our societies, our communities, our lives, but we can see each other through those cracks. They may hold opportunities for growing community resiliency, grassroots power, and interconnected solidarity. Finally, the only way to truly overcome trauma and victimization is to make a journey from tragedy to transformation. There we will find spiritual and psychological strength and endurance, but we have to do it together. And that's the most important lesson of mutual aid. It's just the most basic, normal human action. We all need it and we all want to share it every day. As a path that we walk with deep intention, mutual aid becomes a source of great healing. And that healing is a big part of what all our movements are seeking, whether we know it or not. Okay, I'm just going to wrap it up there. In a way, this format is super difficult to build that group rapport and experience that healing, because when we can't be together in one space, it's harder to feel the same sense of connections, but we'll do our best. So now for the rest of the time, we've got a full hour, that's good. For the rest of the time, we're going to do breakout groups. Hopefully that'll get some of our relationship building going as best as we can. We'll do that for about 30 minutes. Mariela is going to do that for me because I don't really know how Zoom works. And we'll do that in just a minute. And then with whatever time we have left, after about 30 minutes, we can shorten it if you all feel like you want more time for discussion and Q&A at the end, or we can go a full 30 minutes and you can really focus in on your group, which can be really positive also. I'm happy either way. So then for the last 15 or 20 minutes, something like that, we'll go for open discussion, Q&A, etc. So I'm going to read these questions out loud, and then Mariela, are you ready to split people into breakout groups after I finish these questions? And then, yeah, and then we'll just come back together when folks are ready. I'll read stuff in the chat while you all are doing your thing. Okay, I'm going to read these with others. What kinds of actions could you take to increase disaster preparedness? As first steps, consider cataloging and mapping resources. What types of things would you put on your community resource map? What's important? What's critical to know where it is in your neighborhood or city or bioregion or whatever? All right, if you all have any questions, why don't you put those questions in the chat? I will check that out, and yeah, let's do breakout groups, and we'll just figure out the rest through the chat. Okay, that concludes the storytelling sort of lecture part of this workshop. We're going to follow it up with small group discussions, but we're taking that off the recording so folks can have their privacy. And I will just say one last time that I have a lot of gratitude for everyone at Uplift. And if anyone out there has questions and wants to talk about this more, get in touch with me. I'm happy to chat about it. Thanks.